The Greatest Beer Run Ever is a 2022 American biographical war comedy drama film directed and co-written by Peter Farrelly, based on the book of the same name by John Chickie Donahue and Joanna Malloy. The film stars Zac Efron and Russell Crowe, and follows the true story of Donahue, who as a young veteran sneaks into the Vietnam War to deliver some beer to his friends, who are serving their duty. The Greatest Beer Run Ever had its world premiere at the 2022 Toronto International Film Festival on September 13, 2022, and released in select U.S. theaters on September 23 and on Apple TV Plus on September 30, 2022, by Apple Studios. The film received mixed reviews from critics. Zac Efron as John Chickie Donahue, 2. Russell Crowe as Arthur Coates. Jake Picking as Rick Duggan. Kyle Allen as Bobby Pappas. Will Ropp as Kevin McClune. Archie Renault as Tommy Collins. Will Hockman as Tommy Minogue. Matt Cook as Lieutenant Habershaw. Kevin K. Tran as Hugh Oklahoma. Ruby Ashbourne Circus as Christine Donahue. Bill Murray as the Colonel. Christopher Reed Brown as Noodle. Joe Adler as Red. McGregor Arnie as Brendan. Hal Cumpston as Leary. Kristen Carey as Mrs. Minogue. Paul Adelstein as Mr. Donahue. Shirley Ann Kalajian as Mrs. Donahue. Omari K. Chancellor as Erickson. Goya Robles as Almeida. In 1968, former Marine John Chickie Donahue is a slacking merchant seaman who lives with his family in Inwood, New York City, and likes to hang out at a bar operated by a somewhat cynical old man dubbed the Colonel. Chickie's sister Christine is strongly opposed to the Vietnam War in contrast to Chickie and their father, who also formerly served. Upon learning that an old friend, Johnny, is killed in action, Chickie and friends attend his funeral and are informed that another close friend, Tommy Minogue, whom Chickie persuaded to join the draft, has gone missing in action. After the funeral, Chickie and his friend Red find Christine in an anti-war demonstration and get into a brief physical altercation with some protesters. Back at the bar, Chickie and Red talk about how they could lift their serving friend's spirits. Chickie has an idea to go to South Vietnam himself and deliver his friends some beers. The next day, Chickie appears to backtrack on this, but as Tommy's mother suggests Chickie take to her son a set of rosary beads if he finds him, he sets out on the trip against Christine's warnings. Chickie signs on to a ship sailing to Saigon with a duffel bag full of Pabst Blue Ribbon cans in search of military policeman Tommy Collins. He finds Collins, who is ecstatic to see him. That night, Collins' superior officer comes in and chastises Chickie for delivering the beers, then suspects him to be a CIA agent. Chickie and Collins' friends map out a plan for reaching Chickie's other friends, despite Collins urging Chickie to not put himself at risk in the battlefields and return to his ship. With guidance from a local named Hugh, Chickie stops at the Caravel Hotel, where he finds American and British reporters opposed to the war. Using his CIA guys, he hitches a ride on a military caravan to Bien Hoa Air Base and is flown to Da Nang Air Base and then on to LZ Jane, where he searches for Rick Duggan, who is serving in the 1st Cavalry Division. Duggan's sergeant radios him to report to the command post, forcing Duggan to run in plain sight under enemy fire. When Chickie surprises him, Duggan reacts angrily but allows Chickie to join him and his squad on the battlefield as they fire upon the Viet Cong from trenches. When night falls, Chickie again passes around beers. Duggan also tells Chickie that one of their friends, Reynolds, was killed. After parting ways with Duggan in the morning, Chickie is put on a chopper with 2 CIA agents who brutally interrogate and throw out a prisoner. Landing at Kontum Airfield, Chickie requests a ride to Saigon, and one officer explains that he may leave his post to escort Chickie to Pleiku Air Base. When Chickie looks outside, he sees the officer driving a prison caravan. Realizing the agents are after him, he runs into the jungle, hiding until the agents give up the chase. Chickie walks alone and passes by a busted jeep and a child who runs away in fear with her mother. Later that night, after nearly being trampled by elephants running from napalm, Chickie is found by another old friend, Kevin Looney McClune. Despite their orders to move in the opposite direction of where Chickie is headed, Chickie persuades McClune and his men to drive him to Pleiku. McClune puts Chickie on a chopper, and Chickie throws him his beer as the helicopter ascends. Back in Saigon, Chicky learns that his ship has left early due to warnings of an impending attack and is on the way to the Philippines. Hugh gives Chicky directions to the U.S. Embassy, and he gives Hugh his address to visit him in New York. At the embassy, a woman helps him book a flight to Manila the next day in order to rejoin his ship. He returns to the Caravel Hotel and shows the journalists photos as proof that he really went to LZ Jane. As the Viet Cong suddenly invades Saigon in the surprise Tet Offensive, Chicky and photographer Arthur Coates explore the streets, where Chicky sees Hugh killed in the Viet Cong attack on U.S. Embassy. Chicky sees an armored car blow a hole in the embassy wall. The next morning, Coates photographs the aftermath of the embassy attack and witnesses a huge explosion in the distance. The two drive to the scene of the explosion at Long Bin Post, where Coates explains that the military would rather fake an entry hole in the embassy wall than admit that the attack was an inside job. At Long Bin, Chicky looks for and shares a beer with one last wounded friend, Bobby Pappas, who confirms Tommy Minogue's death. Chicky returns home with a changed perspective on the war. Before drinking with his friends, he visits Mrs. Minogue to give her the rosary beads he was to give to Tommy. Chicky takes responsibility for talking Tommy into enlisting and his ultimate death, but Mrs. Minogue forgives him with a hug. In the park, he sits among the tributes for soldiers and shares his last beer with Christine. The epilogue reveals that Collins, Duggan, McClune, and Pappas all survived the war and returned home safely, while Chicky went on to have a long career with the New York City Sandhoggers Union. The film ends with a modern The Greatest Beer Run Ever had its world premiere at the 2022 Toronto International Film Festival on September 13, 2022, and was released in the United States by Apple Studios in select theaters on September 23, 2022, and on Apple TV Plus on September 30, 2022. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 43% based on 118 reviews. The site's critics' consensus reads, "Far from intoxicating, The Greatest Beer Run Ever reduces its fun fact-based story to a flat, flavorless brew." Metacritic assigned the film a weighted average score of 39 out of 100 based on 30 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. 16. In its first week of release, The Greatest Beer Run Ever was the 10th most popular TV show or movie on streaming in the United States. Former United States Secretary of State and Vietnam War veteran John Kerry wrote an op-ed for the Boston Globe in support of the film. In the op-ed, which was published on September 22, 2022, Kerry wrote, "For those of us of the Vietnam generation, the film is a poignant reminder that, whatever we did in that time and whatever our political perspective, how we experienced Vietnam is inextricably intertwined with who we experienced it with. What is your opinion? Don't forget to leave it in the comment section. Goodbye and see you again."